A warm welcome to this video on the ITERS rating scale. And as you already know, the ITERS rating scale is for infants and toddlers, and it's about how good is your provision, how good is your early years setting on a scale from one being inadequate, to seven being excellent. So in this session, we're going to focus on item 5, meal and snack time in the early years setting. And the first slide covers some of my top tips of things that you could and should be doing in your early years classroom to support good, high quality meal and snack time. And if you're doing those things, you'll already be striving towards excellence. Then we start to have a look at the rating scale. We start off with inadequate, which is obviously a level 1. And in the inadequate, we look at the criteria that are there, and we have a think about whether those are the things that you're doing in your setting and your early years classroom. And if you are, they're inadequate. You need to be making changes. From inadequate, we're going to skip up to a grading 3, which is, of course, the minimal requirements. And we will have a look at the criteria for minimal and see whether you are achieving all of those minimal requirements in your early years care and education settings. We'll go on from minimal to jump up to 5, and we'll be looking at the criteria for good provision for meal and snacks according to the ITERS rating scale, and we'll be looking at the criteria there. And then finally moving up to number 7, which is excellent, and we'll be looking at what it means to be providing an excellent provision in relation to item 5, meal and snack, for the ITERS rating. So let's jump right in with Sammy's top tips. Here we go. So meal and snack time in the early years setting. These are 6 things that I think you should be doing. Notice and respond when children are hungry, especially if you're working in baby room. And sometimes children are hungry even when it's not time on your adult-led timetable to eat. So you need to be aware of what's going on for that child. You might need to adjust your routines accordingly to accommodate for children that are hungry. Be aware of that. Ensure good hygiene at meal and snack times. So that's everything from you as a practitioner washing your hands, supporting the children to wash their hands, having clean tables that have had anti-bac spray on them. You're covering tables if they're multi-purpose tables and used for art or other things. You're covering them with sanitized tablecloths which have been sprayed and wiped. Okay, same after the snack time's finished. Spray white, wash hands, clean. Encourage and support independence and self-help skills. Can children cut their own fruit? Can they help themselves to another spoon? Can they hold their own bottles? Can they choose how much of which types of food they want? Top tip number 4 for meals and snacks in early years. Sammy says, support children who are eating and model good eating practices and customs. So you can be eating yourself as a practitioner. You can be supporting children to use cutlery or spoons or their hands. You can be encouraging children to try new things, but you should be there supporting, modeling, guiding children with their eating and with customs. So what I mean by customs is that we say thank you when someone passes us food. We scrape our plates if we're walking. By the time we're finished, we chat socially to those people that are around us. We sit at the table while we're eating. We don't walk around with our bottle, with our food. It's at the designated eating zone in the classroom. Talk with children during meal and snack. Make it a social event. That's what you should be doing as an early years practitioner. So that's Sammy's top tip number 5. And moving on to my final top tip, sit with the children. I cannot say it enough. During meal and snack times, you should be sat with the children at their level, at their table. If you're feeding a child, sitting with the child, having the child on you if they're bottle feeding, and you should be at their level, talking to the children and making meal and snack times fun, sociable occasions. Those are my top tips. And if you're doing those things, then you're already on your way to the road of excellence. Okay, let's jump in and see what it means to be inadequate. Are you doing these things? So let's look at these 3 inadequate criteria. So first of all, the meal and snack schedule does not meet most of the children's needs. You're having lunchtime at 2 o'clock because that's what suits you. No, no, no. Your schedule should be meeting the needs of the children, and you may even need to come off schedule to meet the needs of some children. So inadequate would suggest that hungry children are often crying, sometimes for long periods. Children are waiting more than 3 hours between meals and snacks, and children under 3 should not go 3 hours without food. Every 3 hours they should be eating. Most food being served does not meet nutritional guidelines, or it is not appropriate for the age of the children. So many food components are missing from the meals. Allergies are not considered. Food is served that could cause a choking hazard to children that are too young. Okay, so if you're doing those things, you are inadequate. And let's look at the 3rd criteria for inadequate. Most sanitary procedures are ignored. So hands are not washed. Food is served directly onto tables that may not have been anti-vaxxed. And bottles are left out for too long. And what we mean by bottles is we mean children's milk bottles with milk in it, not water bottles. So if you meet any of those 3 criteria, describe what you're doing in your setting or your early years classroom, you are inadequate and you need to make changes quickly. Let's have a look. There's 2 more for inadequate. Little, if any, supervision when being fed or when eating. So this would be staff being occupied with non-feeding tasks, such as preparing activities or things like that while children are eating. Children wander around with their bottles and staff just prop up bottles for children who are feeding and walk away to do other things. And it could be anything. It could be to supervise other children. But children who are eating should have you with them or a member of staff with them at all times. Staff are often restrictive or harsh during meal times. So they're not necessarily making meal times a fun, sociable, exciting experience. They're speaking harshly, emphasizing manners, handling children roughly, or children are isolated during meal times. I don't like ever to see a child sat alone eating. They should be in social groups for eating. Okay, so let's jump on and see what the minimum requirements are. What should you be doing as a minimum? So let's look at these criteria. The meal and snack schedule generally, not always, generally meets children's needs. So most children don't cry for long periods for their food. Lunch might be too late for 1 or 2 children, but for most children, the way that the schedule is organized meets their hunger needs. Food served usually meets nutritional guidelines and are generally appropriate. So food or substitutes for children with allergies or on vegan diets, for example, are taken care of. Breastfeeding, where possible, is supported, and there are no choking hazards within the meals that are served. Third criteria, some, not consistently and not always, but some appropriate supervision is provided while the children are eating or being fed. Staff watch the children, but might be occupied with other tasks. Let's move on to the next criteria. Some attention is given to the sanitary food service. So, for example, attempts are made to sanitize surfaces. Sinks are separated for hand washing. And generally, hand washing is part of the routine. But there are lapses in the procedures that are being followed for sanitization. Supervision provided to the children is neutral or pleasant, and there's no negative interaction. It's not necessarily a fun-filled social experience that the staff are giving it their all. So some talking to children when being fed. Children are not criticised for spills, and staff give help when needed. So these are the minimum requirements. If you're doing these things, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 of these criteria, you will be coming out at a level 3 on the rating scale, a minimum. Now, you must be doing these things plus more for a good rating. Let's go ahead and see what it means to be a good provider. Here we go. Here's the criteria for goodness, and goodness is level 5. So, first criteria, your meal and snack schedule does meet the needs of individual children. Children are not hungry and don't cry for more than a few minutes before being fed. Breastfed babies are fed when they're hungry. Water is offered to the children between meals. And bottles for babies are ready when they're needed. Next criteria, all food served, all of it is appropriate and meets the nutritional guidelines. Yes, and children with allergies, they have appropriate alternative foods offered. The third criteria, a lot of attention to carrying out sanitization practices. So even if there are some occasional lapses or minor lapses, even if they do occur, like the odd child doesn't wash their hands before sitting down, the table's wiped but the corners missed, something like that. But generally the sanitization procedures, good hygiene is there, it's in place, it's happening, and it's more or less happening consistently. That would be good on the rating scale. Fourth criteria, feeding times are pleasant for the children with appropriate teaching provided through talk, through discussion, etc. Cuddles and talk to babies. You're naming foods, you're patient with slow eaters, you're giving directions, you're asking questions. Would you like some more? How many more peas would you like? Shall I count them onto your plate? And supervision is generally provided to children who are eating or being fed, and staff are focused on the children. Staff watch the children who are eating appropriately, they respond to problems, and they support children's needs. So if you're doing all of those things, you are a good provider in relation to meal and snack. Let's see if you are excellent. So here is our excellence criteria. Staff pay close attention to any child who is eating, holding the babies while they're having their bottles, and sitting at the table at children's eye level when they're eating. The next criteria, interaction is personalized for each child. More, can you tell me what you're eating? I can see you've taken 2 pieces of banana. Do you think you're going to eat them both? Oh, Luna, nice for you to join us. Come and sit down. I've saved you a piece of apple, Luna, because I know you love apples. This is personalized talk for each child, with a lot of pleasant and responsive talking, paying attention to children who communicate their needs and responding appropriately to all the children that are at your meal or snack time. Sanitization procedures are usually carried out with only very, very few minor lapses in the required procedures. Hand washing is consistent. Nappy changing is well away from sanitization areas, and of course the tables are cleaned. Staff actively teach self-help skills when children are ready. Can you scrape your plate in the bin? Would you like to pour your water? Shall Sammy help you pour? How many more spoons would you like? Would you like to take them from the serving bowl yourself? Not having the staff serving for the children. No, no, no. Supporting the children to help themselves. This is excellent practice. Staff using maths talk during feeding times. Very important. Counting the crackers, using words such as another one, more than, less than. Oh, I see you've got less on your plate than Dolev has got on his plate. So if you're doing these things, then you are an excellent provider in relation to food and snack. So having a little think, are you inadequate? Your sanitation procedures ignored? Does your meal times fail to correlate with children's hunger? Are there hungry children in your room or your classroom? Are you supervising the children, or do you sit them down to eat and get on with other things? If this describes you and your practice, you're inadequate. You need to make changes. Are you just doing the bare minimal, or are you doing these things plus more? Are you a good provider, or are you excellent? Do you pay close attention to children? Individualized and personalized communication, supporting number and math talk during feeding times. Perhaps you're doing some of those excellent things, but not all of them, which might mean you're coming out at number 6 on the quality rating scale. Okay, so if you're not yet excellent, what can you do to strive towards excellence?